Good morning, everybody. Today, this morning, we're working on Unit 9. Our topic today is Web Developer Tools, and we basically have two things we're going to be looking at today. And this kind of piggybacks off of our class that follows, Web Programming 1. We're going to be looking at IDEs, or what we call Integrated Development Environments, which we've done a little bit of, and also browser-based development tools, which we've also looked at a little bit. And my hope here is to kind of get you guys looking towards the future of what you're going to need to do work in this program. And not only that, to prepare you really for being more effective as a web developer overall. All right, I did manage to boost my microphone level a little bit, so hopefully that's going to translate into this recording a little better. If not, I'm going to try to sit a little closer and talk a little louder. All right, so as I mentioned, our topics today are IDEs and browser-based development tools. And let's do a little quick survey of the stuff I have in the course shell this morning. The first is a link to an article, and this is just a basic article, and you can find many like it. A lot of people seem to write articles like this, and you know what? It's one of those things where when people create an article like this, every year you can kind of add to the list, and the list gets revised. But there is kind of a standard set of development tools out there that you can choose to use depending on what you're doing. I want you to notice also the website that we're on. This is a website called Mashable, which tends to be kind of geared towards what I call the marketing world. Is really kind of a good way to look at. So people that do like web design, graphic design, advertising, things like that, or a lot of creative work, tend to use this website for information. I'm not sure how it got to that point, but they do get really cool articles on doing technology work for whatever discipline you're into. And they had this interesting article here about different IDEs. And you know, when you're first getting into coding, you're going to kind of be bombarded. You know, you feel, and you know what? It's not really a feeling that goes away, I hate to say, but you always feel overwhelmed with all the stuff that's out there, and you always feel like you're falling behind if you don't know all the tools, right? But here's the reality. You're going to find tools to use that are relevant to whatever you're doing, right? So let's say that you take a class here at Gateway, and next semester, you guys will probably take, if you're full-time students, you'll take Java 2, right, if you're already taking Java 1. You'll take JavaScript, databases, and PHP, right? So it's like 4 different classes that will all use probably 4 different tools to do their work. That's kind of weird, right? Your teacher, whoever's teaching your course, will say, hey, you need to download this piece of software and install it because it's required for the class. Or, like a lot of us do, it's like, well, here's what we use, but if you want to use something else, go ahead. And then what you'll do is you'll listen around to all your classmates, or you'll go do research and read up, or what, maybe even your textbook will say, use this tool. And then you'll use that tool because of like what you're told to use, right? The other thing that you have to do is you kind of have to go out there and you have to explore, because I'm going to tell you what, if you go out as a carpenter and buy a hammer, right, you're going to realize if you're a person who swings a hammer all the time, there's more than one kind of hammer. It depends on the kind of work you're doing. You know, there's framing hammers, there's roofing hammers, there's finishing hammers, you know, there's ball peen hammers and claw hammers, you know, there's all sorts of hammers. And you know what? They're not all good for every task, right? If you're doing framing work, you want like a big, heavy metal shaft hammer or carbon fiber, you know, with a, you know, serrated head so it catches the nail as you swing hard, because you want to pound that like 3-inch nail in with 3 swings, you know, not, you know, a dainty little tap, 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 you know. And you know what? Development tools are very much the same way. There's different types of tools, but here's the key commonality between all IDEs. All integrated development environments have this at their core, and that is a plain text editor, like Notepad or Notepad++. So however fancy the tool gets, ultimately all they really are is a text editor that have other tools attached to them. Okay, so that one commonality is something you're going to see. What makes you choose one tool over another is how it feels and works for you, right? Now you guys see that as I've been running this class, I went back to Dreamweaver, and I'm kind of glad I did because I really kind of enjoy working in that product. Although I have been finding a couple little issues with it, and one of them seems to be that when I have all my like screen recorders and broadcasting my screen, I got a zillion tabs open, it feels like it's a little slow to me. And I'm not really sure exactly why. I know that Dreamweaver and all the Adobe products are written around JavaScript, believe it or not. And so that might be that I'm hitting the JavaScript runtime engine really hard on my machine. So that might be one issue. But there's so many IDEs out there, it will make your head spin. Here's the other problem. Some IDEs are jacks of all trades, meaning they can code in just about any language. Notepad++ is one of those. So if you guys didn't know that, Notepad++, you can get plugins for it that allow you to have a console inside of there. So just like in your, like if you're using Eclipse or JGrasp or NetBeans or whatever you're using for Java, IntelliJ, where you type your code and you hit the run button and a little window pops up and your code runs. Well, Notepad++ can do that too. All you have to do is like find the plugin, add it, and there it is. If you want to go that step. Most coders that code in Java tend to work in one of two products. It's Eclipse and NetBeans. Why? Well, NetBeans is made by the people that make Java. That's the one reason. And Eclipse just is a highly extensible Java-based tool that can do many other languages too. See, that's a complication. So can NetBeans. IntelliJ is on the rise, you know, and then there's all these other tools like BlueJ, and there's online IDEs. But once again, all of them have at their heart a text editor. So that they make that point here that really all IDEs are fancy text editors, and that's very, very true. If you start delving into what IDEs you might want to focus on, all I can say, folks, is you can read every article you want, but until you're sitting down and you're actually working with the product and get a workflow from it, you're not going to really know if you like it or not. So don't be afraid to experiment. The only caveat I would say is beware of how big the installs are. If you choose to use Visual Studio, for example, and that's one IDE that at some point you will be using in the program, when you take the JavaScript class, depending on who's teaching it to you, I want to say that Christian, if you're taking it with him, he tends to use WebStorm in that class, if I remember right. And if I teach that class, I tend to use Visual Studio myself. But it doesn't really matter what the tool is, once again. It's all the auxiliaries that go with. So what we do have is a lot of what we call multi-language IDEs, and they have kind of a quick list of them here. And what I think is important as you look at this article, and you should read it in detail, frankly, are the languages that each one of these supports. So you notice they start listing multi-language IDEs here, and the first two they list are the first two I talked about, which are ones that you might be using in your Java class. If you're not using these in your Java class, you know what? You might want to think about doing it. You know, there's different approaches to learning a language, and some people, and I tend to be one of those, think that sometimes you're better off starting with the most primitive tools so that when you switch to an IDE after you understand how a language works, you can zoom, because it feels like all of a sudden somebody took the ankle weights off. That's the feeling you get when you switch to a good IDE, because you're typing a command or a keyword and it auto-suggests like what comes next. And you know what? Usually it's right. And not only that, a good IDE, as you type your code, will say, hey, look, I'm underlining this red. There's a problem here. Fix it. Because when you hit compile, you're going to get an error. So those are the things that a good IDE will do for you. Eclipse and NetBeans, they are Java focused, but as you can see there, they do multiple languages. and you do those languages well. I will tell you, though, that if you follow what people do in the industry, you will see that people that do certain languages will focus on certain tools with very specific reasons. So Eclipse and NetBeans tend to be built to do Java. That's just kind of like the big thing that they do. But you notice that they also do the other C-style languages like C and C++. They can both do Python. I know some of you are in my Python class, and what tool are we using there?
Is it Python? Is it Anaconda?
Anaconda is the core engine, but the actual IDE we're using is called Spider.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. I had over the
DER.
interface.
Yeah. But notice how there's a bunch of other tools. I'll tell you what, there's some of these tools I've never touched. So for example, Komodo, I've always heard it's great, but there's a price. Did you notice the price on NetBeans and Eclipse? There's no cost. Here's the catch though, you guys. With a lot of these IDEs that do have a cost, there's often a free version for students. And sometimes they have like trial versions that don't expire. So why they really have a price is if a company is buying into the product, they want the company to license it. So you guys here at Gateway, you get like free Microsoft Office, right? Do you think it's really free? It's absolutely not free. The school pays for it on your behalf. Your tuition pays for it. Of course, there's a significant discount. Microsoft also knows that, hey, we'll give it to them super, super cheap, because if they get used to using Word and Excel and PowerPoint, they'll use it their whole life. But the truth is, it's like those are the tools of choice anyhow. All right, but you see this list as it goes down. The top ones here are all what we call multi-language IDEs. And there are people that create little tables like this. And you know what? I'm going to tell you what. I think the best multi-language IDE is not even listed here. You guys want to know what the best multi-language IDE is? In my opinion, of course, it's Visual Studio. Visual Studio is Microsoft's development tool. And the interesting part about it now is that Visual Studio comes in several different flavors. The one that's listed on the left, just regular Visual Studio, is the granddaddy, king of the hill IDE, folks. It does just about every language. The only language it doesn't really do for free is PHP, believe it or not. If you want IntelliSense and autocorrect for PHP, I think you have to pay like an $80 fee for it. So PHP developers tend to stay away from it, although some still use it. But then they have their open source Visual Studio Code product, which is really gaining a lot of ground lately. It went very quickly from being like, oh wow, this is a novelty, to, oh my god, everybody's using it. So it might not be unusual that maybe some of the classes that you have coming up, like maybe your JavaScript class or maybe your PHP class, you might be using Visual Studio Code, or it might be suggested. And I know that I've suggested it in here for doing HTML work because it works pretty well. It color codes beautifully, it supports just about every language, et cetera, et cetera. Visual Studio, though, as a product, is quite in a category of its own because it's so powerful, right? What's the #1 computing platform in the world? Windows for consumers, right? So I think it's estimated that 95% of consumer usage, maybe it's a little less than that, maybe 90%, something like that worldwide, is people using Microsoft Windows, okay? So there's a huge market for it, so that's why it's king of the hill, because that is the tool that you use to develop for Windows. Not that you can't use other tools to develop for Windows, but this is, tightly integrated with the Windows operating system. So why wouldn't you use Microsoft's tool to create stuff for Microsoft platforms? It just kind of makes sense. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to launch Visual Studio up on the screen here, just so you get a look at what a full-blown IDE looks like. So this is Visual Studio 2017, so this is I would call a slightly dated, version, because version 2019 is out. But every time they release a new major version of Windows, there's a major version of Visual Studio that goes with it. So just for example, when Windows 7 came out, it was Visual Studio 2010. When Windows 8 came out, it was Visual Studio 2012. 8.1 was Visual Studio 2013. When they got to 2015, it was Windows 10. But now they have a 2017 and a 2019, which tells you that even though we still call it Windows 10, it's actually several versions down. They probably, like what is coming out as updates right now this fall, would probably really be like, you know, Windows 12 or 13, really, if they followed their own old numbering scheme. But I think Microsoft has this grand plan where they're not going to have version numbers anymore. They're just going to call it Windows. Like think about your phones, like your Android operating systems. You don't think about like what version. Well, some people do, right? Well, you know, some people know what the code name is for the Android that they're running or for the iOS that they're running, and a lot of people couldn't care less. They just call it Android or iOS and just move on, right? It just works, right? So that's kind of the mindset that Microsoft, I think, is moving to. In terms of what this product looks like, I'm trying to see if I have anything in here that would be worthy of bringing up to show you guys. I don't know. I'm bringing up a project that I'm not even sure if it'll come up. I haven't used it on this machine in quite a while, but this is just an example of what the IDE looks like with code inside of it. Now, what you're seeing here is actually an ASP.NET master page. So when you guys get the third semester in this program, and you take the .NET courses, and I'm usually the one that teaches those, by the way. So there's ASP.NET 1 and ASP.NET 2. You will absolutely need this product running on top of Windows in order to do the work for that class. There really is no other option. Visual Studio is like the only tool you can use. And the reason is it tightly integrates with Windows, and we're building applications that run on top of Windows Server and create web pages. So as you look at the code on the screen here, you might see some stuff that kind of looks like the stuff that we're doing now, right? You see HTML all over the place in here, don't you? Right? But then you see other really cryptic looking weird things that are like, oh, what the heck is that? Right? Like, for example, you might see this, right? Where there's no HTML tags, but it looks like HTML, sorta-ish. And if you look, there's, you know, ASP tags in here, which, you know, indicates which technology you're using. And as with many of these pages, and I'm trying to find one that might have some code behind it, like this, you can also write back-end code that runs on the server that drives your application. So the language that you're looking at right here, this is called C#, and that's embedded to .NET environments. That's Microsoft's preferred coding language these days, by the way, is C#. Used to be, Microsoft built everything on top of BASIC, and then they moved to Visual Basic, and both of those are still valid languages, but all Windows development and application development for Windows now by Microsoft is done using this language. And this is the best IDE for it. Now you guys might look at this and go, well, wow, that kind of looks a little like Java. You know what? Because it is kind of like Java, and Java is kind of like C, and they're all in a group of what we call C-style languages. And so you can see it's a curly brace-based language where statements are terminated with semicolons, like Java is. You might not be able to read the code right away, but if you've had a little bit of Java, actually it's probably not that hard to figure out what's going on here. And you know what? You're going to see that correlation as you go from language to language. But why do we use this tool? Because this tool is awesome. So what I'm doing here is I'm kind of breaking my code on purpose. And do you see what it just did? This is the kind of thing that an IDE does for you. You just hover over it, and it says, semicolon expected. Basically, it's saying, what's your problem, dude? Type in a semicolon. All right, I'll fix it. and I typed it in. When you start to type any command in here, it starts to auto sense what you're typing and then gives you a list. And you know what? If I see the thing I want, which is another variable type, I just highlight it, press enter, and it drops it in. Isn't that interesting? Right. So that's what an IDE brings to the mix, a really powerful one like this. This particular IDE can do so many different things, it's kind of mind-boggling. At some point, you will need to install this. It might not be till semester 3. I will tell you, though, that if you do the JavaScript class, that you might want to consider using this product for doing your JavaScript work, because I think it has the best JavaScript debugger compared to just about anything out there. All right. So that's Visual Studio. I'm going to give you a couple more quick little examples of some IDEs. So let's take a look at, well, I have Eclipse loaded up here. And this is a slightly dated version of Eclipse, mind you. And we'll just go with whatever workspace is in there. Eclipse is another one of those multi-language IDEs. And I think of some of the products that I see on those lists. Some of them I don't consider full-blown IDEs, and some of them I do. Like Notepad++ can be if you put the right plugins in. A product like Eclipse or Visual Studio or NetBeans absolutely are, just because of all the stuff that's integrated. So what I'm trying to find here is, do I have any code in here that's relevant? Not what I want to do. I'm just trying to pull the code up on the screen. Here we go. So just to get a feel for what the IDE is. Some IDEs will have certain common things that they do. So for example, all of them will have an editing window, right, where you just work with plain text. They will typically have line numbers. They will color code the code, and then if you break your code, it usually figures it out and highlights it red somehow. This one hasn't done it yet, but eventually it would. You also have what you call, package or file explorers or solution explorers or object explorers. They call them all sorts of different things, but basically where you can see the resources in your project and how they break down into little itsy bitsy pieces that you can code for. There's a built-in debugger, so like if I hit, the run button on it, it will pop up messages down here to see if there's any issues with your code before it actually executes, or else it'll go ahead and just execute. So it's kind of fascinating when you start to do that and you start to see, what the different tools look like. And don't be intimidated by the code that you see on the screen. What looks like a lot of code sometimes is all done automatically too. That's the other beauty of working with an IDE. So how many of you are like in Java right now and you've learned how to do like gets and sets, right? And then you come to a product like Eclipse and you just type in your private variables at the top, and then you just right click and go getters and setters, boom, they're all there. Did you guys learn that trick yet?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. When you were learning how to do it in like a primitive editor like JGrasp, you'd have to type each one out, and if you screwed something up, it was like, you don't have to do that, folks, right? And that's another reason you use an IDE, is those shortcut tools help you not make mistakes. Because when you're working professionally, it's one thing if you're learning, but if you're working professionally, you need to work fast and accurately. And that's why you use the best tools possible. That's Eclipse. Sure, save the changes. All right, so I think you guys have the general idea. So you do have an assignment inside here. Well, I want you to read that article, at least as a starting point. But find other articles too. Then you just have an assignment here to research popular IDEs. And I would encourage you to look at the ones that I just showed you. Why not, you know? And once you've researched some, answer this list of questions really quickly. You can do that in a Word doc if you want, or you can go right to the right submission area and type it in directly if that's easier for you. All right, the second thing that I want you to look at are what we call developer tools inside of our browser. Now, we kind of tinkered with that a little bit last week in Web 1, but what I'd like you to do is kind of ramp that up a little bit, because as you move from Web 1 to second semester, where you're going to start to do your JavaScript stuff, you're going to start leaning on those tools pretty heavily to do your work. And if you're not, I'm going to tell you what, you're kind of doing something wrong. Because the best tool that can tell you what's working in the browser is the browser itself. And so when the people at Firefox realized this a long time ago, they developed this tool called Firebug.
Yeah, they just got rid of that not too long ago.
Right, because the developer tools are now built into all the browsers. But it used to be you'd have to go get a special extension for Firefox and load it in. So all the developers would use Firefox because it had this cool tool called Firebug, right? And I'm going to, just for the sake of it, bring up some work that we're working on in Web 1 because I don't really want to look at a really complex page to do this stuff. I'd rather look at something a little more simplistic. So I'm going to bring up my index.html page for Mr. Robot that I've been working on. And the developer tools that we are referring to, folks, are the ones that are available from the menu structure here. So with Chrome, the easiest way to access it is not through the menus. All right? So I'm going to show you how you do it through the menus. You actually have to come in here, and then you have to come down here and choose Developer Tools, and then it brings up what we call the Inspect panel. My easier way to get here, frankly, is you just find an open area of the page, so not on top of a word, although you can do it on top of a word. And here's the thing. Whatever you right-click on and then choose to inspect, it drops you directly on that code. So maybe you do want to right-click on it, because that's where your problem is. But notice what the Inspect panel does is it brings up like all these collection of high-powered tools. It's not just one tool. It's not just like a view source, although that's kind of like the most primitive of tools, right? You can, on all the browsers, you can do this, right? Just actually look straight up at the source code. And sometimes that's enough, okay? But sometimes it's not even close to enough. And what they do here is they break it down into a number of different categories. So whatever I'm like on top of here, so I've got this H2 highlighted, it highlights it up above as well. So you see as I hover over it, how it identifies the H2. It tells me what size it is, what tag it is, what the class name is. And then on the right-hand side, I want you to notice that it also has all the styles attached to that element listed here. And what's even more fascinating, and I know that we kind of demonstrated this already, but I can come in here and I can turn the CSS on and off. So you see, like, now keep in mind, I'm doing this, it's not changing the code in my file. It's just changing what the browser is showing me. So what more powerful way to like fix something or figure out what the right setting is? Like if you don't like this color here, I can come in here and pick a different color, you know, lock it in, and then I can see what it looks like. And then if I like what I just did, then I can come here and I can just copy this and take it over and put it in my document. So you can try the change before you actually employ it. I think it's brilliant. Now, if you start digging around, you're going to notice that, you know, the two most basic tools are this what we call the DOM structure. You'll learn about that in JavaScript class. Don't worry about it right now. But the basic structure of the document, and then the CSS that's attached to it. And the ability to live edit that CSS is huge. Huge, absolutely huge. But I want you to notice that that's just one tab out of all the tools that are available. It's actually kind of mind-boggling how much stuff is here. Here we have a console. Now, you guys should get like a little connection here. If you're doing Java class right now, right? And when you guys are coding, you're coding for the console, which is for the command line. This, folks, is guess what? This is the console for JavaScript in your browser. And not only that, if I had JavaScript attached to this page, and there were errors in the JavaScript, this is where the errors appear. Isn't it? So I have no JavaScript in here. The other thing that I can do is I can actually come in here and type commands. This is JavaScript. Yeah, I didn't like that. Oh, I didn't. No, I didn't do. I didn't put a semicolon after it, I think. Oh, it still says undefined. All right. I guess I don't remember my JavaScript that well. Anyhow, you can come in here and directly type in JavaScript commands. In fact, you might learn your first little bits of JavaScript that way, because you can actually just come in here and create code and test it right here. But more importantly, if you go to like a website like this, and you do an inspect, and you go to the console, it shows you. So apparently they have a little bit of an issue here with one of their cookies being secure. And apparently there's a whole bunch of them. There's also the sources tab that goes in and shows you all the different files that are actually attached to this web page. You notice how like commercial websites have a lot of stuff that's attached? And if you are, you click through to any of these resources, any of the files, you can actually kind of dig down. And I'm not even sure what this stuff is that I'm clicking on, but I'm clicking on it anyhow.
Oh, that's the text. If you go back up, that one was images with the text.
Yeah, and this is actual JavaScript code that you can read in the console directly. If there's, like I said, if there are errors with the JavaScript, they pop up in the console. So it's a troubleshooting tool. There's also this networking tab that once you load a page, it shows you how long it takes to load all. Did you guys see all the stuff that just happened? I refreshed the page, and it shows you how long in milliseconds it took to load each individual component. So every file that's attached is listed down here. This is all the stuff that this web page loaded, how long it took to load. Isn't that crazy? The images, the code, the JavaScript, the CSS, etc., 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 etc. Now, you guys might not be at the point where you're writing code that is this complex, but you know what? You can also get into any one of these and get very specific information, like what machine it came from, the IP address. It's like, oh my God, the detail is mind-boggling, what you can pull out of here. There's also a performance thing where you can actually hit a record button, start recording, and then what it does is it basically captures the screen for you. You guys seen that? Screenshots. I can also look at what's actually in memory. This is the mind-boggling kind of stuff here, folks. Application level stuff. So if you're working with databases that are attaching locally, this is where you can see the database content that's being pulled in. So you can go to a website and they can create a database on your computer where they store information relative to what you're doing on their website. Scary? That's what makes these websites work. But here's the thing. I can go in and look at exactly what they're doing. They can't hide it. That's the beauty of the web. The only thing they can hide is the code that runs on their server. But anything that pushes to the browser, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, images, whatever, you can see all of that through these tools. Every last little bit of it. There's also a security panel that tells you if the site is actually secure. I know a lot of you are aware of that. You know, you should always look for the lock before you like type in your credit card stuff. But that's the same kind of information that comes up here. But here I can actually go in and look at their certificate that validates that they're a real site. And there's also some audits that you can do here depending on what you're looking for. So some of these actually get kind of interesting because they can do things. So take a look at this like bottom thing. You can actually simulate slow connections.
Is that visuals? That is visuals.
Now, well, this is the Visual Studio website we're looking at. So I can simulate a slow connection to see what it would look like for a user on a slow connection. Isn't that interesting? Now, I would be cautious with this tool, but they also have things, you know, to just recommend what they think are good approaches. Now, this is Chrome, and Chrome also has this additional little panel here that does a simulation of, you know, handheld devices, for example. Like this is what the website would look like on my iPhone 6 or 7, just for example. I'm not a huge fan of using the emulator, honestly, but there's so many little plugins like that. Now, for as cool as Chrome's developer tools are, they're not the only one in the game, folks. There's also Firefox. So Firefox, let's go to the same page. I think that's kind of an interesting thing to do. Let's go to Visual Studio's homepage. Firefox, and I'm not sure how updated my version is here, has, you know, it's very, very similar to Chrome. But you have to remember Firefox comes from a direct descendant of the original graphical browser, Mosaic, right, that you read about in your book. So the people that developed Mosaic down at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where they have the supercomputing center down in the center of the state. And by the way, a couple of Wisconsin kids, so graphical browsers come from a couple of Wisconsin kids. You guys should be proud of that. That turned into, back in the old days, what we called Netscape. Mosaic became Netscape, and then Netscape got bought out and bought out and bought out, and then became Mozilla, and the Mozilla Foundation, which still runs Firefox, then eventually took on the name of Firefox. So this is, you know...
Mosaic is no longer used.
Yeah, well, you know, no, it's not, because it's so antiquated, it probably wouldn't load any of our pages these days. But it is the core browser that everybody borrowed their code from to build all the modern browsers. Anyhow, what's really interesting about this product, though, is because they were the ones that originally did Firebug, you notice how I'm going into their developer tools now? And you guys notice how crazy long their list is of products that they have attached inside here? And some of them are all integrated together, and some of them are actually separate tools. But let's just go ahead and bring up the inspector tool, which you're going to see looks very, very similar to Chrome's tool. Or should I really say Chrome's tool looks really, really similar to this one, because this one came first, by the way. I've been kind of venturing back to this tool a lot more lately, because I think it's a little more elegant than what Chrome is doing. So some of the same types of things that you might do in terms of content, but notice how it really clearly shows you like margins and padding just by hovering over stuff. Isn't that cool? Right? And then like if you're on something, I can click on it, it'll bring it up in the code, it'll bring up its styles. If I want to like start messing with the floats, you know, the font weight, and you know what, not only can you come in here and, you know, float something, but I can change it on the fly, right? Shows me the box model here, and then you can go into these like various little sub things, You want to play with the size of the font. You know, here I am changing Microsoft's web page, right, like on the fly. You know, and what's fun about it is it's showing you what you're messing with, and you see it happening at the same time. I mean, how cool is that? And then see, the result of it is you can come in here, kind of get your stuff close by hand coding, come in here and then just mess with it until you get what you want. And then all you have to do is copy that code back over to your style sheet.
It can also be used for email because in retail, they had started doing that to change websites, to change prices, and then expect the price matching, and they just take it.
You got it. Yeah, so that's really clever. So like you walk into, like I think of like going to Fry's in Chicago to buy computer parts, and if you can find a real website, you know, where it's like $20 cheaper on something, they'll honor that price. But yeah, you're right. Some people go in there and they use JavaScript to alter the code on the page, and they show it to the person and go, see? But you know what the smart places do is they bring it up on the screen too, right, just to make sure. All right, but this is the development tools inside the browsers. Edge also has these tools, and there's other browsers that do too. The one that's most interesting, though, and I don't know if it's still this way, because I guess I use it so rarely, is the Safari browser on the Mac actually requires that you enable the ability to even see the developer tools before you can see them. You can't even view source code in that browser without turning on the tools first. I think that's a little frustrating. Maybe they got smart and made it just a switch now. But with any of the powerful browsers, if you simply just do a right click and inspect, you can access most of the tools. With Firefox, though, what I would encourage you guys to do is actually go in here and start looking at some of these other tools, because there's so much more that you can do here. So what is this? It's a JavaScript scratch. You can just write JavaScript right here. You can create the code, run it, inspect it. Heck, you don't even need an IDE. That's kind of mind-boggling. Just built right into the browser. Very fascinating. All right. That kind of wraps up what we're covering here today in this class. I'm going to go back to our course shell here and just say that there's an assignment related to the developer tools as well. So what I want you to do is go in there, and if you haven't played with this stuff yet, go in and start to explore. You can't really break anything, you know, because you're doing it on the front end. You're not really ruining your code by playing with the developer tools. And just go through and answer the questions. Once again, you can put the answers directly into the right submission area if you wish, or you can create a Word doc. The other thing that I did is I threw in an extra credit assignment where you guys can scarf up on a few extra points here. So for every IDE that you install, I'll give you half point extra credit. You have to screenshot it and tell me a little bit about it. So you know what? You may already have a few installed. There's easy pickup points here, folks. And the reason I put these in is because if you have like late work from like week 2 or something that you never turned in, worth a couple of points, here's a way to kind of cover those points. Because if you turn in the week 2 work now, you're only going to get half the value of those assignments. Extra credit never has a diminished point value, by the way. So just keep that in mind as well. That's why I throw those in. Plus, you know what? You're going to do it anyhow, so why not earn some points in the process? That's kind of my thinking. So please explore, install stuff, read up on it, try tools. You might find something you really like. In fact, you might find stuff that we're not aware of. Share it with us. Share it with your classmates. Share it with the world. You know, blog about it. Post it on Facebook. Whatever, you know. Just be adventurous and go out there. You know, ultimately, you're going to find stuff that really suits you as a person and a workflow. Or if you get a job somewhere, they might say you have to use this product, right? So one way or the other, you're going to be using these types of tools in your career, and yeah, they're going to evolve over time and change. You know, when I first learned how to do this stuff, I think the very first language I coded in was Pascal, right? Which was a language that was designed not to be a real language, by the way. It was designed to be a teaching language. But it was a really good gateway language for learning other things. And with that product, it was basically the same type of thing, a text editor, and then the ability to hit a run button. It would compile your code, give you your errors if you had any, and then if there were no errors, it would run it in a little console window and show you what you were doing, right? So even though that was 30 years ago, kind of dating myself, still the same basic concept. It really hasn't changed. The tools have evolved because back then there was no IntelliSense or on-the-fly debugging where it underlines it red if you screw up. But same concept. All right, folks, that wraps today's session. Get the work done. You have about a week or so to complete it, and then we are moving on.